The dinner table felt colder than usual. I sat there, picking at my mashed potatoes, still trying to process the email I had received only 4 hours ago. After 6 years of being the top software architect at my firm, I was part of a massive layoff. I had come home to my parents' house looking for a hug or a kind word. I needed a soft place to land. Instead, my brother Leo was busy scrolling through his phone, showing off photos of his brand new luxury sports car. He didn't even look up when I told him I lost my job. "That's a shame, Francis," my dad said, but his eyes were on Leo's screen. Then the mood shifted. Leo slammed his phone face down on the table and slid a piece of paper toward me. It was his monthly car loan statement. The number at the bottom was huge. "So, who's gonna repay my car loan now?" Leo asked, his voice sharp and demanding. "I bought this car because you promised the family was doing great. Now that you're useless and out of work, I'm stuck with the bill." I stared at him, shocked. My dad nodded in agreement. "Leo's car is a symbol of our family's success, Francis. Since you aren't bringing in a check anymore, we've already posted your room on Airbnb to cover his payments." My mother didn't look me in the eye as she slid a cardboard box across the hardwood floor toward my feet. It was empty, waiting for my life to be packed inside. "We need the room ready by check-in tomorrow," she whispered. Her mother hands her a box and tells her she needs to be out of the master bedroom by tomorrow morning. I stood in the middle of my bedroom, the room I had lived in for years, feeling like a stranger. My parents stood in the doorway, watching me pack as if I were a tenant they were evicting for non-payment. "Where am I supposed to go?" I asked, my voice trembling. "I've paid the bills here for years. I've kept this family afloat." My dad crossed his arms, his face turning into a mask of cold indifference. "You can stay in the basement," he said. "It's unfinished and a bit damp, but it's a roof. Of course, you'll have to earn your keep now. Since you don't have a job, you'll be responsible for all the chores and cooking for the new paying guests." Leo leaned against the doorframe, a smug grin plastered across his face. He was enjoying my downfall. To him, I was no longer the successful older sister. I was just a servant. I looked at the dark, stairs leading down to the basement. It was windowless and smelled of old dust. I realized then that my years of sacrifice meant nothing to them. They only valued me when I was a walking ATM. I dragged my suitcase toward the stairs, feeling the weight of their betrayal. Leo laughs and tells her that the new tenant is actually his girlfriend, who needs a place to stay for free. The basement was worse than I remembered. A single light bulb hung from the ceiling, casting long, shaky shadows against the concrete walls. I sat on my old twin mattress and opened my laptop. My hands were shaking, but not from the cold. I logged into a private portal for Summit Holdings LLC. This was a secret I had kept for 3 long years. Back then, my father's gambling debts had spiraled out of control. The bank was days away from taking the house. I had stepped in, but I didn't just give them money. I bought the house from the bank through my LLC to protect them from themselves. I stared at the digital deed on my screen. Under owner name, it didn't say my father's name. It said Summit Holdings LLC, and I was the sole owner of that company. I had been playing the role of a daughter living at home, paying rent to my parents, when in reality, I was the one allowing them to live here. They thought they were the masters of this domain, but they were actually my guests. As I scrolled through the records, my blood ran cold. I realized my parents haven't paid property taxes, which I secretly covers in years. The next morning, the smell of bacon wafted down the basement stairs. I wasn't invited to breakfast. I was expected to clean up after it. As I walked into the kitchen, Leo was lounging at the table, crumbs all over his shirt. He looked at my laptop bag and snapped his fingers. "Hey, Francis, give me your laptop. I need to apply for jobs, or whatever. Mine is too slow for the gaming sites I like." I tried to move past him, but he grabbed my arm. "I'm serious. Dad said since you're part of the family, your stuff is our stuff. In fact, your savings belong to all of us now that you aren't earning." I pulled my arm away, my heart hammering. I caught him trying to peek at my screen, his fingers hovering over my banking app. He truly believed he was entitled to every cent I had ever worked for. He viewed my success as a family resource he could harvest whenever he wanted. Later that afternoon, I was sweeping the porch when I heard my father talking to our neighbor over the fence. His voice was hushed but excited. "Yeah, it's a big house for just us," he said. Frances overhears her father telling a neighbor that he's thinking of selling the house to give Leo a nest egg. I woke up on Tuesday to the sound of car doors slamming in the driveway. I peered out of the small, dirty basement window and saw a bright yellow sign leaning against the fence.
It was a for sale sign.
A woman in a sharp blazer was walking up the path with a clipboard. My father was right there, shaking her hand and gesturing toward the house like he owned every brick. He had officially listed the house for sale. He was planning to sell a property that wasn't his, all to give Leo a nest egg for his lazy lifestyle. I walked up the stairs, my face a mask of calm. I met them in the hallway. The realtor looked at my messy hair and old sweatshirt with a frown. My father didn't even introduce me. He just waved a hand toward the basement door. "This is just the help," he lied to the realtor. The woman nodded and turned to me. "Listen, honey, we have a few high-end buyers coming through this afternoon. You need to stay out of sight. You make the place look cluttered and well lived in. It's bad for the aesthetic." The realtor tells Frances she has to leave during showings because she makes the place look cluttered. I didn't argue. I didn't scream. I simply went back down to the basement, grabbed my phone, and dialed a number I hadn't called in a long time. It was my corporate lawyer's office. I told them to patch me through to the realtor's agency, but not as Frances. I spoke as the legal representative of Summit Holdings LLC. My voice was cold and professional, a total contrast to the girl who had been told she looked cluttered. I informed the agency that they were attempting to sell a property without the owner's consent. "The person who signed your listing agreement has no legal right to the title," I said. "If you set foot on that property again for a showing, we will file a lawsuit for trespassing and fraud that will shut your agency down by Monday." I could hear the realtor's breathing hitch on the other end of the line. I knew exactly what would happen next. She was terrified of losing her license. 10 minutes later, I watched through the window as she practically ran to her car. The realtor calls her father in a panic, telling him there's a cloud on the title. The explosion happened almost instantly. I heard my father yelling in the kitchen, slamming his fist against the table. "What do you mean I don't own it? I've lived here for 30 years. He stormed down the basement stairs, his face purple with rage. He looked at me as if I were a ghost. "What did you do, Frances?" "That realtor just called and said the sale is blocked. She mentioned some company I've never heard of. You've been at that computer all day. You're jinxing this family with your bad luck and your bitterness ever since you got fired." I just sat there, watching him unravel. He couldn't even imagine that I was the one in control. He blamed my energy rather than his own ignorance. Leo came down behind him, looking equally pissed. He had probably already picked out a new car to buy with the house money. "You're ruining everything, sis," Leo spat. "If this house doesn't sell, I can't keep up with my lifestyle. If you don't fix this legal glitch or whatever it is, I'm going to repo your car to pay my loan." Dad said he'd sign the papers for me. After they left me alone, I started doing some digging. If my father was this desperate to sell a house he didn't own, there had to be more to the story. I used my skills to look into his recent financial history. I found things that made my stomach turn. He hadn't just lost the house to the bank 3 years ago. He had continued his gambling habit in secret. To cover his losses, he had been taking out private loans from a local loan shark named Victor. He had used the house, a house he didn't own, as collateral for the debt. I was sitting in the living room later that evening when there was a heavy, rhythmic knocking at the front door. My parents and Leo were out at a movie, probably celebrating the money they didn't have yet. I opened the door and found a man standing there who looked like he was made of stone. He had a scar running through his eyebrow and wore an expensive leather jacket. He didn't ask to come in, he just stepped over the threshold. The loan shark shows up at the front door while Frances is home alone. The man, Victor, didn't threaten me at first. He just looked around the foyer and nodded. "Nice place," he said. "Your father told me it was worth a lot more than he borrowed. But the payments have stopped, and I hear there's trouble with the sale." "I don't like trouble." I stayed calm. I didn't tell him who I was. I just told him my father wasn't home. Victor leaned in close, the smell of expensive cologne and tobacco filling the air. Tell him I don't care about clouds on titles. I care about my money. If I don't see a check by Friday, I'm coming for the furniture. And the cars. After he left, I sat on the stairs, my head in my hands. My family's lies were deeper than I ever imagined. They had been living a total fantasy on my dime, acting like royalty while leaning on a house that was legally mine and debt that was rapidly becoming dangerous. I felt a strange sense of distance from them. They weren't my family anymore. They were a liability. Suddenly, my phone chimed. It was an encrypted message from a headhunter in the city. She receives a notification. A new job offer with a massive signing bonus has arrived. The job was perfect. It was a director-level position at a rival firm, and the salary was even higher than my last one. The signing bonus alone was enough to buy a small condo in cash. I felt a surge of triumph, but I didn't run upstairs to tell them. I realized that if they knew I had money again, the abuse would just turn back into begging. I wanted to see how far their cruelty would go when they truly believed I was broke and helpless. I accepted the job but told my family I was struggling to find work and that my unemployment check was being delayed. That evening, my mother came down to the basement. She didn't ask how I was. She didn't ask if I had eaten. She sat on the edge of my mattress and looked at my hand. "Francis, we're in a real hole," she said, her voice sounding practiced and fake. "Leo's car insurance is due and your father is stressed. We need some quick cash." She reached out and touched the vintage diamond ring on my finger. It had belonged to my grandmother, the only person who had ever truly loved me. Her mother asks her to sell her grandmother's wedding ring to pay for Leo's car insurance. I refused to give up the ring, which only made things worse. The next day, the Airbnb guest arrived. It was Leo's girlfriend, a girl named Nikki who wore too much perfume and acted like she was the queen of the house. She moved into my old master bedroom, throwing her bags onto the bed I had bought with my own money. Within an hour, she was standing at the top of the basement stairs, shouting down at me. "Hey,
Francis, right?
Leo says you're the maid now since you can't pay rent. I need these jeans washed and dried by 7. And don't use the cheap detergent. I have sensitive skin." I spent the afternoon doing her laundry, my jaw clenched so tight it ached. I watched as she and Leo laughed in the kitchen, eating the food I had prepared while my parents cheered them on. They were treating me like a servant in my own home. Later, when they went out for a drive in Leo's sports car, I went upstairs to get a glass of water. I walked past my old room and saw the door open. Nikki had been busy. I walked in, and my heart stopped. Francis finds the girlfriend searching through her jewelry box. Nikki didn't even look guilty. She just held up a pair of my pearl earrings and asked if they were real. I snatched them back and told her to get out of my things. She just laughed and told me I should be grateful. She was even letting me live in the basement. I went back downstairs and opened my laptop. It was time. I didn't just write a code. I wrote an official eviction notice for Summit Holdings LLC. I addressed it to all occupants of the property. I had my lawyer sign off on it, but I didn't serve it yet. I was waiting for the perfect moment. I wanted to wait for the big dinner my parents were planning for Leo's birthday. They were going to announce his engagement to Nikki and talk about the house sale again. I was sitting in the basement, finalizing the legal documents, when I heard a notification on my phone. It was a security alert from my cloud storage. Someone was trying to access my digital signatures. I checked the IP address. It was the computer in the living room. I did some quick digging and felt a wave of cold fury. She discovers Leo has forged her signature on a document to transfer her car title to him. The next morning, I saw Leo through the kitchen window. He was walking toward my car with a set of keys and a smug look on his face. He thought he had won. He thought he had successfully stolen my vehicle by forging my name on the title transfer. I sat at the kitchen table, calmly sipping coffee, as he climbed into the driver's seat. My parents were standing on the porch, waving him off like he was going on a grand adventure. Leo turned the key, but nothing happened. He tried again. The lights didn't even flicker. The car was a dead hunk of metal. I had used the car's built-in software link to remotely disable the engine and lock the steering column. I watched as Leo jumped out of the car, kicking the tire in frustration. He stormed into the house, his face bright red. "What did you do to your car?" he screamed at me. "I have the title. It's mine now. Why won't it start?" I didn't blink. I just told him that maybe the car didn't want to be stolen by a loser. He screams at her, and her father raises a hand to her for disrespecting your brother. My father's hand didn't land because I caught his wrist. I looked him in the eye with a coldness that seemed to shock him. "Don't ever try that again," I whispered. He pulled back, looking shaken but still angry. He was embarrassed that he couldn't control me. He turned to my mother and pointed at the basement door. "That's it. I'm done with your attitude, Francis. You're a parasite in this house, and you're making your brother miserable. You have until sunset to leave this property entirely. I don't care where you go." He didn't wait for me to pack. He went into the basement, grabbed my suitcase, and literally threw it out the front door. It hit the wet pavement and burst open, my clothes spilling into the gray Nebraska rain. My mother stood behind him, saying nothing. Leo and Nikki were laughing from the stairs. I stood in the driveway, soaked to the bone, looking at the house I had saved, the house I legally owned, and the people I had protected. I looked at my father and felt nothing but pity. Francis stands in the rain and says, "You're making a mistake you can't undo." I didn't argue. I picked up my wet clothes, shoved them back into my bag, and walked to the end of the driveway. I called an Uber and headed straight to the finest hotel in the city. I checked into a suite that cost more per night than Leo's car payment. I spent the evening in a warm bath, letting the signing bonus from my new job handle the bill. The next morning, I made a few more phone calls. I hired a high-end moving company and gave them a very specific list. Every piece of furniture in that house that I had paid for, which was almost everything, was coming with me. I waited until I knew my parents and Leo were out at the mall. The movers arrived at the house with 3 large trucks. I showed them my receipts and my deed as the owner of the property. They went to work with professional speed. By the time they were done, the house was a hollow shell. They took the beds, the dining table, the leather sofas, and even the high-end appliances I had upgraded. Her parents returned to a house that is 80% empty, including the fridge and the stove. The messages started hitting my phone an hour later. My mother was hysterical, crying that robbers had cleaned them out. Then my father called, shouting that I must have stolen the furniture out of spite. I didn't answer. I just watched the smart home map on my phone. Without me there to pay the extra maintenance, the house's aging systems began to fail. I had been the one who knew how to jiggle the furnace and fix the pilot light. That evening, a cold front moved in, and the heater finally gave out for good. Inside the empty, freezing house, the tension was rising. The paying guest, Nikki, was furious. She had expected a luxury stay, not a sleeping bag on a cold floor in a house with no heat. She told Leo she wasn't paying a dime of rent and that she wanted to leave. Leo was desperate. He needed that rent money for his car loan. He tried to argue with the bank over the phone, but it was too late. He had missed too many payments. Leo's car is repossessed in the middle of the night. The following morning, my phone buzzed with a call from my mother. Her voice was weak and shaky. "Francis, please. Everything is gone. Leo's car was taken. The house is freezing and we have no food because the stove is gone. We just need a few $100s to get by until your father can figure things out." I sat in my warm hotel suite, looking out at the city skyline. I felt a strange sense of peace. "Why are you calling me?" I asked calmly. "You told me I was a parasite and threw me in the rain. Why don't you ask the landlord for a refund?" There was a long silence on the other end. I could hear my father muttering in the background. My mother sounded confused, her voice cracking as she spoke. "What landlord? What are you talking about, Francis? We own this house. Your father's family has had this land for 30 years. I almost felt sorry for her in that moment. They were so blinded by their own pride that they had forgotten the paperwork trouble the realtor had mentioned. Her mother asks, "What landlord?" "We own this house." While they were suffering in the cold, I was busy at the courthouse. I had discovered that Leo hadn't given up on his greed. He had tried one last desperate move. He had gone to the county office and tried to file a quitclaim deed to transfer the property from Summit Holdings to himself. He had used a fake notary and a forged signature that looked nothing like mine. He was trying to steal the entire house before the bank or the mysterious owner could act. He didn't realize that as the owner, I received instant notifications for any filings against the title. The county clerk hadn't just flagged the document. She had called the police. Forgery of a property deed is a serious felony. I went down to the office to give my statement. I showed them my identification and the original incorporation papers for Summit Holdings LLC. I watched as the clerk stamped the forged deed with a big red fraud mark. I felt a surge of cold satisfaction. Leo's entitlement had finally led him into a trap he couldn't talk his way out of. The county clerk flags the fraud and notifies Francis immediately. I wasn't done yet. I wanted to make sure I had everything I needed for the final showdown. I hired a private investigator to keep an eye on the house. He sent me a link to a hidden camera feed and several screenshots. My parents and Nikki were desperate for cash. Since I had taken the big furniture, they were now going through the attic and the basement, taking the smaller items I had left behind, the tools, the spare electronics, and the decorative pieces. They were listing them for sale on local buy and sell groups. I watched the live feed as Nikki carried a box of my professional photography equipment to a car in the driveway. These were items that were officially registered as assets of my LLC for tax purposes. They weren't just family stuff, they were stolen corporate property. I realized they were selling items that belonged to my LLC, not just her personal stuff. Every single transaction was being recorded and logged by my investigator. They were digging their own graves, one small sale at a time. It was time to end the game. I sat in my lawyer's office as she finalized the notice of termination of tenancy. This wasn't just a letter. It was a legal bomb. It informed the occupants that because of multiple lease violations, including illegal subletting and property damage, they had 3 days to vacate the premises before a forcible eviction. My lawyer sent the notice via a process server. I knew exactly when it was delivered because Leo was, incredibly, filming a lifestyle vlog for his social media followers at that exact moment. I watched the video later. Leo was sitting on a folded blanket on the floor, complaining to his fans about his jealous sister and how hard life was. There was a knock at the door. He answered it, took the envelope, and read it on camera. He laughed, looking at the lens with a mocking grin. "Look at this, guys," he said. "Another fake letter from a neighbor. Someone is jealous of our house." He ripped the notice into tiny pieces and threw them at the camera. Her father thinks it's a prank from a neighbor and rips it up on a family live stream Leo is filming. The 3 days passed. I made my final move. Since all the utility accounts, electricity, water, and gas, were in my name and attached to my credit, I called the companies. I informed them that the property was being vacated and that I wanted the services terminated immediately. I made my final payments and closed the accounts. That evening, the temperature dropped into the 30s. I watched the smart meter data on my phone. At exactly 6 p.m., the lights in the house went out. The water stopped flowing. The family was sitting in the dark, huddled around a single candle, when a loud, official knock sounded at the door. This time, it wasn't a process server. It was the county sheriff, flanked by 2 deputies. They weren't there to talk. They were there to serve the official court-ordered eviction papers and to arrest Leo for the deed forgery. I watched from my car at the end of the street as the blue and red lights flashed against the dark house. The family is sitting in the dark when the sheriff arrives to serve the official papers. The scene at the house was chaotic. My mother was screaming, my father was trying to argue with the sheriff, and Leo was being led away in handcuffs, still shouting about his rights. Nikki had already vanished into the night, taking her bags and leaving Leo behind the moment things got real. The sheriff gave my parents 1 hour to gather their clothes and leave the property. They were escorted to a local motel, their faces pale and defeated. They still didn't understand how this had happened. The next day, they were summoned to court for a combined hearing on the unlawful detainer and the fraud charges. They arrived at the courthouse, looking disheveled and angry. They spent the morning talking to a public defender, still claiming that they were the victims of a corporate conspiracy. Leo sat in the back in his orange jumpsuit, glaring at everyone. He told his followers on TikTok, using a phone he'd hidden, that his evil sister was trying to steal their parents' home. He truly believed his own lies. The courtroom was quiet as the judge took the bench. My father stood up, waving a tattered, yellowed piece of paper from 30 years ago. "This is the deed," he shouted. "My name is on it. This is my house." The judge looked at the paper, then at the court records. He sighed and looked at my lawyer. "Counselor, please present the evidence." My lawyer stood and handed over the certified deed from Summit Holdings LLC, along with the purchase records from the bank foreclosure 3 years ago. The judge examined the documents for a long time. Then he looked at my father with an expression of pure pity. "Mr. Mitchell," the judge said, "this deed you are holding is no longer valid. You lost this house to the bank 3 years ago. This company, Summit Holdings, bought it legally. And the owner of that company is sitting right there."
He pointed at me.
The room went dead silent. The judge reveals that Frances has been the owner for 3 years, and her parents were essentially guests. The silence in the courtroom was deafening. My mother turned to look at me, her mouth hanging open. My father looked like he had been struck by lightning. I stood up and walked to the front of the room. I didn't feel happy. I just felt tired. I looked at the judge and asked for permission to speak. I told the whole story. How I had saved them from homelessness, how I had paid the taxes and the insurance, and how I had been treated like a servant in the house I owned. The truth came out like a flood. I showed the records of the gambling debts I had cleared. I showed the logs of the furniture I had bought. The audience in the gallery whispered in shock. My parents had been living a lie for 3 years, and I was the only reason they had a roof. When the reality finally hit Leo, he snapped. He jumped up and tried to attack me in the hallway as the deputies were leading him away. He was tackled to the ground. Leo tries to attack Francis in the hallway, and he is arrested for his previous forgery and fraud. 2 weeks later, I stood in the empty living room of the house. The for sale sign was up again, but this time, it was my sign. I had accepted an offer from a young couple with 2 small children who were so excited to start their lives there. I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I was moving to the city to start my new job, a fresh start where no one knew me as the provider. I looked at the dark basement door one last time and then walked out the front door, locking it behind me. My parents and Leo were living in a small, cramped trailer on the edge of town, finally facing the reality of their own choices. They were watching my success from a distance, but they were no longer a part of it. I had learned that you can't save people who are determined to drown you with them. My parents wanted to rent out my room to pay for a car. They ended up losing the roof over their heads because they forgot that a home isn't built on a son's ego, but on the daughter they decided was worth nothing.